Prince Philip did not leave the Queen because their marriage had collapsed. He moved away after decades of duty, sacrifice, and public scrutiny. He needed one final place where he could live as himself. That choice shocked the royal establishment in 2017, but its roots reached back to his childhood. Philip was born on June 10, 1921, into Greek and Danish royalty. He was the son of Prince Andrew of Greece and Princess Alice of Battenberg. On paper, he belonged to two royal bloodlines. In reality, he spent much of his early life feeling that he belonged nowhere. Political upheaval forced his family into exile when he was still a toddler. They settled in St. Cloud, near Paris, in a house provided by relatives. But the family soon fell apart. His four older sisters married German princes and left. His mother suffered a severe mental breakdown and was placed in an asylum. His father abandoned the family and moved to Monte Carlo, where he lived in isolation and gambling. By the age of 9, Philip had lost the stable family life most children depend on. He was sent to England and placed under the care of his maternal grandmother at Kensington Palace. He moved between relatives and boarding schools almost like an orphan. The boy who would one day walk beside the Queen grew up without a permanent home. That rootless childhood shaped him. Philip became independent, adaptable, direct, and resistant to control. At Gordonstoun School in Scotland, he learned discipline, endurance, and self-reliance. The environment suited someone who had already survived exile and abandonment. It trained him to stand on his own, never knowing that royal life would later require him to spend decades standing behind his wife. The first important spark between Philip and Elizabeth came in 1939 at the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. Elizabeth was 13. Philip was 18, confident, athletic, and training for a naval future. She was fascinated by him. He seemed bold where she was careful, outspoken where she was reserved, and unafraid of convention. Their relationship grew through wartime letters and rare meetings. Philip served in the Royal Navy while Elizabeth waited and wrote to him. Yet many royal advisors doubted his suitability. They worried about his foreign birth, his lack of fortune, and his family connections. His sisters had married German nobles, and some of those families had links to the Nazi regime. For a British royal household emerging from war, those associations were deeply troubling. In 1946, Philip proposed. Elizabeth accepted without hesitation. The engagement remained secret until she reached the age of 21. When it was announced, the news gave a war-weary nation a symbol of hope and renewal. On to November 20, 1947, they married at Westminster Abbey. Before the wedding, Philip gave up his Greek and Danish titles. He adopted the surname Mountbatten and became the Duke of Edinburgh. To the public, it looked like a glorious new beginning. For Philip, it was also the first of many sacrifices. Between 1949 and 1951, Philip and Elizabeth lived in Malta while he served in the Royal Navy. This was perhaps the most ordinary period of their marriage. Philip had a profession, a command structure he understood, and a future he could shape through his own ability. Elizabeth, still a princess, experienced a life with less ceremony and fewer restrictions. Philip flourished in naval service. He was active, ambitious, and respected. But the peaceful chapter ended in 1952 when King George VI died. Elizabeth became queen at the age of 25, and Philip's future changed overnight. He had expected to continue his naval career. Instead, duty required him to abandon it. The man trained to command ships was now expected to attend ceremonies, support the monarch, and remain one step behind his wife in public. Her accession gave Britain a young queen, but it left Philip struggling to understand who he was allowed to be. The battle over the royal family name made the loss even more painful. Philip's uncle, Lord Mountbatten, wanted the royal house to become the House of Mountbatten. Philip himself was said to prefer the House of Edinburgh. But Queen Mary and Prime Minister Winston Churchill opposed any change. Elizabeth was required to declare that the royal house would remain Windsor. Philip was devastated. He had surrendered his nationality, his titles, and his naval career. Now he was told that he could not even pass his name to his children. He reportedly complained that he felt like a bloody amoeba inside the royal system, a man with no identity of his own. A compromise came in 1960. Some descendants of Elizabeth and Philip could use the surname Mountbatten Windsor. It was a partial victory, but the damage had already been done. Philip understood that the needs of the crown would always outweigh his personal wishes. During the 1950s, rumors began circulating about an alleged connection between Philip and Galina Ulanova, the celebrated Soviet ballerina. The claim was explosive. Ulanova was and Britain and the Soviet Union were locked in Cold War tension. Any connection between the Queen's husband and a prominent Soviet figure could raise political and security concerns. No evidence ever proved an affair. Still, the story followed Philip for years. Elizabeth never addressed it publicly, but people close to the household reportedly believed the gossip caused strain. Some royal observers later suggested that the British government may have helped suppress the story to protect the monarchy and avoid diplomatic complications. That remained speculation, not established fact. Prince Andrew consistently defended his father as a man of honor who placed family above everything else. Princess Anne appeared to understand the rumors as part of a larger problem. Philip was sociable, direct, energetic, and unwilling to behave like a silent, ceremonial figure. Because of that, every friendship was examined and every conversation was questioned. Behind the public immunity, frustration grew. Philip was a man of action trapped in a ceremonial role. He had natural authority, but no constitutional power. He wanted to make decisions and feel useful, yet the institution often treated him as an accessory to the sovereign. Elizabeth faced a painful conflict of her own. She loved Philip, but she had been raised to place duty above personal desire. She could see what royal life was doing to him, yet she could not abandon the responsibilities of the crown. Reports from inside the household suggested that she was sometimes moved to tears during private discussions about his unhappiness. Their children also saw the tension. Princess Anne later described how difficult it was for her father to feel valued within the royal structure. He had given up almost everything to support Elizabeth, but he still felt like an outsider looking in on his own life. Philip responded by creating meaningful work. He devoted himself to patronages, youth programs, science, design, technology, and environmental causes. These activities gave him purpose. He could challenge assumptions, ask direct questions, and support projects with visible results. Elizabeth learned when to give him space. She understood that his frustration was not a rejection of her. It was the response of an independent man living inside one of the most controlled institutions in the world. Their marriage survived because they learned to manage the conflict between his need for autonomy and the monarchy's demand for conformity. That tension reached a decisive point in 2017. Philip was 96 when he officially retired from public duties. After decades of ceremonies, tours, speeches, and royal engagements, he withdrew from the role that had defined much of his adult life. Then he moved to Wood Farm, a modest cottage on the Sandringham estate. He left behind the formality of Buckingham Palace and the grandeur of Windsor Castle. Wood Farm was simple, quiet, private, and surrounded by countryside. It offered almost everything the main royal residences could not. There Philip could read, paint, walk, and live without a constant schedule of appearances. He could speak without every word, becoming palace business. Fewer guards nearby and fewer reminders that he was always being watched. To outsiders, the arrangement looked like a separation. The Queen remained connected to London and Windsor because of her constitutional duties, while Philip spent much of his time at Sandringham. Some people saw the distance as proof that the marriage had become cold. Princess Anne rejected that interpretation. She explained that the arrangement reflected understanding rather than breakdown. Elizabeth needed to continue the work of the sovereign. Philip needed peace, privacy, and the freedom to shape his remaining years. After a lifetime of compromise, they had reached an agreement that respected both realities. Palace insiders suggested the situation may have been more complicated than the official version. Philip had reportedly become increasingly irritated by rigid security rules, constant staff ceremonies, and formal routines. Some reports even suggested that members of the Queen's household quietly supported the move because it reduced tension and allowed both of them to live more comfortably. The most revealing part of the decision was Elizabeth's response. She did not treat his move as abandonment. She understood that Philip was not running away from their marriage. He was searching for peace after about 70 years of service and sacrifice. Elizabeth had watched him surrender his titles, nationality, surname, naval command, and much of his private freedom. She had seen him struggle to find a meaningful role beside a sovereign whose duty always came first. In their final chapter, she gave him something the monarchy had rarely allowed him to possess: the right to choose how he wanted to live. Their bond continued through regular visits and weekly telephone calls. Physical distance did not erase their history. They had already survived war, political controversy, family conflict, public gossip, and constitutional pressure. Living in different residences was not enough to destroy a relationship built over more than 7 decades. Then, in early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic changed everything. Elizabeth and Philip decided to isolate together at Windsor Castle. After years of spending much of their time in separate homes, they were suddenly sharing daily life again. Their children noticed a renewed closeness. Prince Charles later described seeing a softer connection between his parents. They ate together, talked, and spent long periods in quiet companionship. Without royal tours and public engagements, they could return to something simple. The pandemic brought tragedy to millions, but it gave them uninterrupted time together. Those close to them described moments of tenderness and humor. Even as his health weakened, Philip continued to make Elizabeth laugh with his sharp wit and irreverent observations. They could sit together in silence with 73 years of history speaking for them. Philip died on April 9, 2021, only about 2 months before his 100th birthday. He was 99. His death ended the longest royal marriage in British history. Elizabeth and Philip had been married for 73 years. Philip's final years at Wood Farm were not a rejection of Elizabeth. They were the last expression of the independence he had fought to preserve since childhood. The exiled boy who had been moved from country to country, school to school, and relative to relative, finally found a place where he could decide how to spend his days. Elizabeth understood that need because she knew him more deeply than anyone else. She knew the restless energy beneath the uniform, the frustration behind the jokes, and the private cost of standing behind the throne. Supporting his move did not show that she loved him less. It showed how completely she understood him. Their story challenges the simple fantasy of royal romance. Love did not protect them from loneliness, resentment, rumor, or sacrifice. It did not mean they always agreed or always lived under the same roof. Their marriage lasted because they remained committed without denying each other's individuality. For Elizabeth, love meant recognizing the cost of those sacrifices. It meant allowing Philip to build independent work, giving him space when palace life became unbearable, and finally supporting his choice to live at Wood Farm. Their reunion at Windsor completed the story. After years of distance, they came together again, not because duty demanded it, but because circumstances gave them the chance. In their final months, they rediscovered the companionship that had begun at Dartmouth in 1939. Prince Philip's life began with exile and loss. It ended with a home of his own, a wife who understood why he needed it. and a marriage that survived because both people accepted a difficult truth. Love is not always measured by proximity. Sometimes it is measured by the freedom one person is willing to give another. The decision to live apart did not reveal the failure of their marriage. It revealed its strength. Elizabeth did not need to keep Philip beside her every day to know that he remained loyal. Philip did not need to live inside a palace to remain devoted to the woman he had supported for more than 70 years. What appeared from the outside to be distance was in reality trust. What looked like separation was a carefully chosen peace, and what many people saw as the closing of a marriage was actually the final chapter of one of the most enduring royal partnerships in modern history.